Welcome to this talk on the new View-Only Mode feature of the GNU Radio Companion, the GRC. I'm Oskar Ekholm and I'm a computer science student at KTH, Stockholm, Sweden. And I've been working on this View-Only Mode feature during the summer for this year's Google Summer of Code. And today I'm presenting an overview of the feature. So, just to summarize what the View-Only Mode is briefly, to start off. The View-Only Mode is a GRC feature which allows the user to open and view untrusted flow graphs without having to evaluate the untrusted code contained in the block parameters. So, you might be familiar with block parameters actually being Python expressions. So, in this block parameter window we can input some Python code and have the GRC evaluate that, which is a nice feature to have since it allows us to have some parameters which dynamically depend on some outside factor. And in this specific example, it's simply convenient to just input the calculation and have the GRC actually calculate the value. And then the evaluated value is used by the GRC for running and generating the flow graph, but also it is shown on the block surface. And whenever you're saving a flow graph, these expressions are saved to the GRC file, but not the values, the evaluated values themselves. Or that's how it has been before the View-Only Mode, at least. And this is fine and dandy, of course, when we created the flow graph ourselves, since we know the Python code that's inside and we trust it since we've done it ourselves. But if we were to download some flow graph from the internet, we might not be so trusting, and we wouldn't really know what is contained in that flow graph. So I want to show how we could embed some sort of malicious code in an expression. So let's take this expression, for example. I know it's sort of hard to read due to the colors, but it basically says import OS module and then execute the command touch home Oscar GRC test. So we create this file GRC test in my home directory. This is executed once we load the flow graph. So we open the flow graph, the GRC will execute and evaluate the expressions of the parameters, and thus a file GRC test is created in my home directory. And of course this is quite a harmless example where creating a file isn't a huge deal, but we could easily change this command to something else. Perhaps we could remove our home directory, and of course I would not be so happy if I loaded a flow graph and it would just erase all of my files. So this sort of illustrates the problem that we're trying to solve. And I also just want to add that there are other expressions which are evaluated when loading the flow graph other than the parameter expressions, such as the ones in the image here, where we have some parameters, and in this case we have the hide parameter which has this conditional. So there are expressions originating from outside the flow graph file itself, but rather from the definitions of the blocks that the flow graph uses. And I will get back to this soon. So let's start to look at the actual View-Only Mode for a bit. So here. Okay, so let's say that I've downloaded some random flow graph from the internet, and I don't really trust it yet. I don't know what's in it. So before we have trusted a flow graph, it's regarded by the GRC as untrusted. And whenever we open an untrusted flow graph, it will open it in view-only mode, meaning evaluations are disabled. So, for example, let's say we have this complete.grc file downloaded, and here I'm just running the GRC from source, but of course you will probably run it in some different way. But let's say I want to open this file, and we see it opens, and since it is untrusted, we are actually in view-only mode right now, but it looks like completely the same as if we were not. And that's the point of view-only mode. We want to view the flow graph as it had been loaded using the evaluations. But in this case, we haven't actually evaluated anything on our machine. So we might move around some blocks, or we might just check out the parameters and the info about each block. So for example, here we have this example from previously. And you can see that it renders the evaluated value, even though we haven't actually evaluated it yet on the block surface. And whenever we try to make some modifying action, such as if we were to, I don't know, for example, we can add a block, or we could change a parameter, then we would get a prompt. So if I show here, we get this prompt, which says that you cannot do this action in view-only mode, since we would need to re-evaluate the parameters or the expressions. So to perform the action, you have to trust the flow graph. And you can trust it once using this button, or you can trust it indefinitely. If you trust it once, it will be trusted in this session, and whenever you close and reopen the flow graph, it will be untrusted again. And if you trust it forever, it will be regarded as trusted between sessions until you manually revoke that trust. And we can also see this expression overview here, where there is a list of all the expressions that would have been evaluated if we were to trust the flow graph. So, for example, you can see the expression from the example and some other expressions here. And you can see that it has the origin of flow graph. So these are expressions that are actually stored in the GRC file, in the flow graph file. But if we scroll down a bit, we can also see other expressions which originate from the block definition. And this is what I showed you briefly before, where the block templates may contain expressions as well. So you can see those here. And of course you can see the name of the blocks where it belongs to. My window is quite small, but of course you can resize it and drag the borders of the table and stuff. Right. So, and if perhaps you think it's too cluttered in the view where you have all of these block definitions, so you can choose to only show the flow graph expressions. And this provides an easy method of just looking at the expressions, and then you can sort of gauge if this flow graph contains malicious code or not. So there are not that many expressions here, but if we were to look at all of the parameters, we would see like literals and identifiers. But since we know that those are not malicious and cannot be malicious in any way, we filter those out. So here we are only interested in the parameters where they actually contain some sort of interesting expression that the user should take a look at. Okay, so for example, we can choose to cancel. Avbryt is cancel in Swedish. So we choose to cancel, and you can see the block was not placed. And if we were to add a block, we can choose to trust it, and we have the block. And additionally, I also want to show that under the file tab, you can enable or disable view-only mode. So perhaps you're not interested in using this view-only mode, so just disable it in the file tab using this toggle button. Or you can press the Manage Trust, and you open this Trust Manager. And the Trust Manager basically lists all of the flow graphs which you have trusted indefinitely. So you can see here which I've trusted indefinitely, and you can add new flow graphs here, or you can remove flow graphs from that list. And you can also add an entire directory where so basically you add a directory, and all of the flow graphs contained within that directory are also regarded as trusted. So for example, this is a directory, whereas this is just an individual flow graph. We can, for example, remove it from the list. All right. So there is one more thing that I would like to show you about the view-only mode. But first I need to explain sort of how the view-only mode works under the hood. So before the view-only mode, only the parameter expressions were saved to the flow graph file. But after view-only, I've also made it so that the parameters evaluated values are saved as well. So the view-only mode works in the way that it loads the evaluated values and uses those for displaying the graph, instead of having to evaluate the values. But in the case where such values are missing, for example, if we have saved some file before introducing the view-only mode, we have this problem that we do not have evaluated values, but we also do not want to evaluate the expressions. So the behavior in those cases is that a prompt is displayed immediately on opening the file, and the text is slightly different to describe this case. And the typical expected workflow is to just look at the expression overview and sort of gauge, okay, so I can't view it in view-only mode, so I either have to trust it or just disregard viewing it at all. So I look at the expressions in the overview, and based on that I make my decision. If I trust it, it will open just as normal. You're basically outside of view-only mode. If I were to close this and then cancel, it would simply just close the page. So that is pretty much it for the view-only mode. There is a pull request live on GitHub, which contains the code for what I've shown you today. And I'm still working on some small details before it's ready to merge, but hopefully I can get that done as soon as possible. And so please check out the pull request, clone it, and try the feature out, and provide feedback if you have any. And to summarize, opening untrusted flow graphs introduces the risk of running untrusted code, but the view-only mode solves this problem by allowing the user to open and view untrusted flow graphs without having to evaluate the expressions themselves. Using the expression overview, the user can sort of quickly gauge how if the user should trust the flow graph or not, if they're malicious, or if the expressions are malicious or not. And that has been it for today's talk on the view-only mode. So thanks for listening, and thanks to everyone that has taken part of the project in some way, and especially thanks to my Google Summer of Code mentors, Sebastian and Mark.